My pleasure to welcome our first panel to the stage. In this Tech Talk, our speakers are going to discuss emerging practices for transitioning to and managing the cloud-based enterprise. So please join me in welcoming from the far stage over there, Bill Babylon, who's the staff architect for Splunk. We have Ken Rogers next to him, Acting Deputy Chief Information Officer for Business Management and Planning, Bureau of Information Resource Management at the Department of State. We have John Everett next to him, the Executive Director, Demand Management Division, Office of Information and Technology at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and our moderator, Luke McCormick, who is the host of the Federal Executive Forum for Federal News Radio and a former Chief Information Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. So with that, Luke, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Perfect. Can everyone hear me? Good? All right. Yeah, the way we're going to do this is we'll go about half an hour or so. We're going to spend the last 10 minutes for questions so you guys can tee those up. And we'll start playing some pickup basketball at the end here. Let me start by just allowing these folks to introduce themselves and say a little bit about sort of what they do in regards to the whole cloud, migration environment. But before we do that, let me just start with, boy, isn't this a great time to be modernizing your environment, right? You've got this tectonic shift of technology that's going on that's allowing us to enable this modernization activity. You've got air cover coming out of the White House, air cover coming out of the Hill in regards to bipartisan, support for the MGT. Executive orders that are telling folks to modernize and make sure you do it securely, make sure your environments are and your agencies are efficient. I mean, the table is set to go, if you will. And I'd like to tell everyone that this constellation of activities is sort of giving everyone a hunting license to move out and start to modernize and deliver those services to the citizens and to the veterans and, to name your mission, so to speak. So with that, why don't we start, and let me ask John, if you could just introduce yourself and what is your role at the VA?
So the job title is, as was mentioned, Executive Director for the Demand Management Division. And that's a brand new organization within the VA. It's as old as I have been there, which is a little over 5 months. And basically, demand management covers the entire intake of new applications and recycling applications into the cloud into the VA. So I have architecture, engineering, intake and analysis. I have tools. I have the cloud, obviously, and strategy and technologies under me. Prior to coming to the VA, I worked at the FBI for 10 years in an SES slot, and with Luke when he was over there at DOJ. And so I've had the opportunity to develop the cloud, begin the development of the cloud in the FBI, and then again at the VA. So I've had the opportunity to see the functionality, or lack of it in some cases, in two different organizations.
Okay, fantastic. Good timing for this role at the VA. Ken, what does a Deputy CIO of Business Management do at State Department? How does that fit into the whole cloud migration, cloud implementation effort?
So my subtitle is really Chief Cheese Mover.
And a lot of cheese being moved in this community.
A lot of cheese being moved.
Yeah, there sure is.
And a lot of folks don't understand what the term modernization means. At State Department, they really understand what modernization means. It means don't move my cheese.
Wow. Okay.
Modernization is all about change. And when you talk about change, IT modernization is all about change. And so the subcurrent when you talk about IT modernization is really the cultural mentality of the IT folks that are resistant to change, the security folks resistant to change, and then the generational responses to change in an organization. So I manage the strategy, architecture, portfolio management, and budget for IT. We have about a $2.5 billion IT portfolio, and just recently have published an updated IT strategic plan for the department, aligned to a lot of the initiatives that were spoken about this morning by the OSTP rep, as well as a cloud strategy. So pushing that vision out in front of the organization and bringing the organization together around a common vision for cloud optimization rather than cloud first.
Wow, okay. A lot of moving parts going on over there at the State Department, and good catch on the soft skills that are required as you start to move the cheese around. How about, Bill, how about at Splunk? What's the role of the staff architect as far as cloud is concerned?
Great question. And Ken, as you said, chief cheese mover, my role is help people to find the cheese. And as things are changing, help them move with that cultural change or that technology change. Because as we move to the cloud, the things we used to worry about in IT, the servers, the switches, the routers, they're gone. They've been taken away. So it's that transformation, both technically and culturally. My role is help people to adapt to this changing world, and more importantly, to optimize their work in this new cloud environment.
Okay, fantastic. So Ken, let's go back to you and talk about specifically, the use of the cloud and how it's evolved in recent years at the State Department. I know State Department, like a lot of agencies, there's State Department proper headquarters, and then there's these operating components out there that may or may not be in line. Talk about what's going on with your cloud pursuit at State.
So phase one, cloud first, we jumped into the fray about 8 years ago, and that was really, it was kind of a multi-tiered effort to really get what is the cloud and how do we get the organization acclimated to a different way of doing IT. Kind of that movement from buy, build, maintain to consumption model. When we introduced this, that we did a number of symposiums around cloud computing to basically communicate the message that it's okay to go to the cloud, but we had a lot of resistance. As we educated the workforce, the organizations, the mission components around cloud, we really started getting momentum behind that cloud first initiative to the point where we've spent $200 million. We have at least 120 production cloud environments. Wow. What I call now, cloud sprawl. We're still focusing on data center consolidation, and now I have a huge challenge where I have production cloud environments all over the place, and it's continuing to grow. So phase two is what Danielle spoke about earlier this morning, is that optimization or an optimized strategy for the cloud. How do I bring that together around shared services? How do I lay out the right kind of goals and objectives around that? And how do I do that without using the term consolidation? Because anytime I use the term consolidation at headquarters at State Department, I have component bureaus that have missions, and they're really not interested in giving up their IT into a shared service. Luke knows about that, as we were both component CIOs at DHS years ago. So we have just launched an effort to establish a central cloud service ecosystem. It's multi-platform. How do we do this, build this, architect this in a way that really allows us to address data issues, workforce issues, and that long-term path to the cloud?
Is it primarily, I'm sure it's a hybrid configuration, but primarily private cloud kind of configuration with some public, or more public cloud pursuit with a little bit of private cloud?
So it is.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. No, it's really, we're using the GovCloud environment.
Sure.
But it's primarily a private cloud capability that we're moving to. So in terms of the challenge, we have our we call them ESOCs, our primary and secondary data centers, where we have a lot of our systems hosted today, and we're looking at how do we start moving a lot of that capability out to a cloud environment.
Okay, and we'll talk about challenges in a moment, because when you start moving this computing around, there's lots of things that need to be thought about very carefully that are enablers, but also are areas of vulnerability if not implemented right. How about at the VA? Talk about the cloud journey. Where are you guys on your cloud journey? And How's it going so far?
So prior to my arrival, cloud was almost ad hoc. It was, the VA is more than 300,000 employees and almost a $5 billion annual budget for IT. And so there were a lot of different organizations, kind of disparate, going their own way. And from an economics point of view and from a standardization point of view and that type of thing, that doesn't make sense. So my job up to this point has been trying to get my arms around all of that to come up with. We now have what we call the VA Enterprise Cloud, which is a hybrid cloud. It's essentially AWS and Azure at this point with an on-premise cloud that we don't have yet, but that's on the drawing boards. So we'll have a combination of ways for applications to get to the cloud. We've had a lot of issues with governance and process and procedures that we've had to develop so that the application owners and system owners have a way to get there. And then, again, budget has been another issue that's been part of the journey, trying to get a systematic way to have operational expenses funded on a monthly basis. For example, when you get that monthly bill for AWS or Azure, those things have to be paid. Sure. And so we need to have, and we're working to get that standard systematic process so that those bills can be paid in a timely manner.
Bill, I would imagine, sitting in the role of a key partner in this ecosystem community, where I'm certain that a lot of agencies are leaning on Splunk to really help them, in this migration journey. What are you seeing out there as far as how the agencies are sort of tracking on this journey?
Great question. Couple of points that have already been made. In some agencies, it's well-defined. Everyone is definitely moving to a hybrid architecture, combination of public, private, and on-prem clouds. But more often, we're starting to see the silos of the clouds. Everyone's doing their own things. It's scattered out there. And they're each creating their own process, and they're carrying their technology stack out there. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge. But when I step back and I look at some of the common threads, it is hybrid. But one of the challenges, and I'm sure we'll get to this, is visibility, not just into the cloud, but also into what John just mentioned, the bill, the chargeback. What are the costs that are out there? Because at the end of the month, you do get a bill. And it's a challenge as we move to the cloud. We move from the on-prem data centers where that infrastructure was just covered, where now it's a discrete cost, and understanding that. Adilson shared earlier today about the state of Louisiana, where they introduced the concept of showback to give people an idea of what it would be like as they moved to the cloud before they actually went to that actual
show back your bill and sort of hey, here's a representative example.
Exactly.
Before we put it on. Yeah, it's interesting, this evolution, right? It was, look, we want to stay in these data centers because we know they're secure and we can get our hands around it, to, well, maybe they're not as secure as we thought, but we're concerned about the cloud and what the cloud is and is it secure, and to where, yeah, it looks like the cloud might be more secure than our own environments have been over the years due to technical debt and a variety of other reasons, to now this evolution where you're starting to move out into the cloud and you're starting to get these pockets of excellence and silos and data in a lot of different places that maybe you don't have a full handle on. Let's talk about challenges. Ken, what are you seeing and experiencing out there as you guys start to move out on this journey? You've touched on a couple of them, but specifically, where are your barriers today?
Yeah, well, I've already touched on the cultural shift. It's a fundamental paradigm shift of what we're doing, and so there's a couple of the biggest barriers we have is the workforce, and I consider in the workforce the IT workforce, the user workforce, and the contractor consultancy workforce. So with a build, buy, maintain mentality, we have a number of integrators that are there that some have understood the shift, but as we move to a consumption model, we are basically eliminating a good percentage over the next 5 years of the contractors that support a lot of what we do the way we do it today. So that's a huge barrier, and those are long-term contracts that are set in place. I would say another area where we lack the capability, the skill set on the inherently governmental is, what does a cloud service provider look like? What does the acquisition look like? And how do we build those so that we put the right controls in? So we love the elasticity of the cloud, but the budget guys don't love the elasticity of the cloud, because we could scale in a given month and be, anti-deficient because we don't have the resources to do that. So are there the right caps in these agreements so that we don't run into those kind of problems? One of the key challenges that we have at State Department is we have 300 locations around the globe. We're in every country in the world. We have the last mile challenge around the globe. And when you kind of open the hood, lift up the hood of cloud computing, you still have data at rest. And so when we use AWS or Azure and we're overseas, if our data is at rest in a data center of one of these cloud providers, and they're under the rules of the country, the laws of the country, what are the challenges that we have? Number two, huge challenge that we have is TIC, the Trusted Internet Connection from DHS, requiring us to monitor that. That's a domestic solution. So we're backhauling a lot of our information all the way through the TIC domestic and to data centers here. So latency, connectivity, leveraging. So I'll give an example of ServiceNow. ServiceNow has 2 data centers for their cloud environment, one in Virginia, one in Florida. So in South America, we have no problem leveraging our capability in that cloud, but in some parts of Africa and other regions, it's very difficult to reach that cloud and get the performance we need. So those are just some to throw out there as key challenges that we have.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, part of this is, how does an agency mature to become a smart steward, a smart consumer of these goods and services? And part of that is, having the instrumentation, to be able to meter this capability, and of course secure it. And we'll talk about some of the network technology barriers in our next panel. But let's talk to VA. What do you see as sort of the upfront challenges that you all are experiencing today as you start on this cloud journey?
I could probably talk an hour on this, on this subject.
It's a journey.
Yeah. So the biggest challenge, as Ken mentioned, I think, is trying to overcome the ignorance is a hard word, but it's the folks at the operations level or executive level that don't really know the ins and outs of cloud. For example, most of the folks that I have met think of moving to the cloud as infrastructure as a service. We're going to pick our application up and we're going to move it to the cloud, and that's equates to lift and shift. And if you don't optimize that when you do it, you're not going to get the benefits of the cloud. And it's more than just infrastructure as a service. It's platform and it's software as a service. All of those as a service things that cloud can offer. That a lot of the folks that are in the decision-making road don't really understand. So part of my job is to try to help educate and to communicate those benefits to those individuals. The other challenges, I think, are, again, the funding one is a challenge. It continues to be. It was at the FBI. It is here. And until we get everybody into that OpEx as opposed to CapEx thinking, there'll still be a challenge.
And I'll just put in a plug for the MGT. There's 2 pieces of that I think are extremely powerful. There's many pieces that are powerful. One, obviously, is the funding that may be available to an agency. As you know, there was, I think, 9 different projects that were submitted forward for consideration out of 7 agencies. They picked 4. We'll soon hear what those are. But they also, that act also gives the ability and the authority for an agency to create a working capital fund specifically tied to modernization. So you can do what I used to like to call it DOJ, cut, keep, and reinvest, and take some of those savings, reinvest it, put it back into that working capital fund instrument, and then use that capability multi-year to do some of this modernization. Bill, I would imagine that as you go across the landscape, you see a lot of challenges out there in regards to this journey to moving to the cloud. And I'm just curious to know, where do you see sort of the common challenges that are sort of popping up over and over in the various agencies and components?
A number of common challenges, one John's already talked about is the ignorance, the misunderstanding of what is the cloud and what it isn't, because when it was a physical data center, we could all walk downstairs and see our server racks. So it's helping people understand what the cloud is and gaining visibility into it. And really it comes down to how do we mitigate those challenges? And with Splunk, we're in a unique position. Whether you're running on-prem or in a public cloud or a private cloud, to Splunk, it doesn't matter. They're data sources out there. And then providing that visibility of the before, the during, and the after as you move with that common view. That's one of the powers that people don't understand about Splunk, that we can actually mitigate that challenge, take that negative and make it into a positive so they can become comfortable with technology today as they're moving to tomorrow's environment. And it's not a rip and replace.
Yeah, and I would imagine, you start to get into full enablement, right? This is discussion that we were having a minute ago about instrumentation, right? And being able to meter and become a smart consumer, I think is really important. So, as the agencies are taking this journey and they're starting to move their compute into different environments, and we'll talk about shared services in our second panel. Let's just talk about straight into the cloud and having this hybrid type cloud where you're putting some stuff out into a public cloud, and in many cases, it sounds like in all cases, multiple public clouds along with your hybrid environment. How do you keep a handle on the security of that, right? I mean, you had a pretty good handle on it, at least we all thought we did. When we sort of owned and operated it, how do you ensure that you've got good metering, good responsible security practices in an environment that's so heterogeneous? Let's start with you. Yes, Ken, please.
So, I think part of our strategy is to create that ecosystem, that environment, the central shared services, push many of our either customers or IRM up the stack to the SaaS layer, building the security in that ecosystem so there's inherited controls that are leveraged at the SaaS layer. This does two things. It creates a huge value proposition to our customers who actually don't want to consolidate. I didn't use that word right. But currently they're building the whole stack. They're doing the infrastructure, the platform, and the SaaS to get this little bit of functionality, and they're using their budget to do that. So if we can lower the cost by centralizing that capability into a shared ecosystem, then they can actually understand their requirements and build that capability in an agile way, leveraging the security controls that are there. The second thing that we're doing is developing, I think one of the speakers earlier spoke about the identity management. So how do we deal with identity and credentials? This is really an effort to push that security posture down to the data layer. So with credentialing and role-based access and having that as a central service out to our customers. Again, funding that, making that available so there's ease of use, access to the data, and kind of ubiquity of that kind of security control across the department.
Yeah, I heard somebody say the other day that, identity, becomes, the real enabler, right? I mean, if you think about that across these various communities. How about at VA? How are you ensuring that, you keep the right kind of security posture as you're starting to, move the cheese, as you like to say?
So I couldn't say it any better than what Ken just said. We're doing pretty much the same thing. The stumbling block or the strategy right now is to get that security ATO process up front so that we're working it all from the very beginning, from the time we identify either a new application to go to the cloud or an old one that needs to be refactored or re-engineered, that process is known and is worked by the security personnel and the application owners at the same time, so that when we get to the end, it's not an afterthought. And I think the education part of that is critical in terms of the CISOs and the other folks that work those processes within the VA have to move out of the 10-year-old mindset of physical security to hardware boxes that sit in the data center to something that's different.
We all talk about ATO in a day. I'm sure many of you heard that, and it's interesting because the whole concept and principle of FedRAMP is to put those common controls together, certify them so that you can inherit those. But I think as everyone sort of learns to move towards this environment, there's still a lot of discovery going on right now, and level of I'll say level of comfort, but a lot of it is about level of familiarity. I did just see where the 100th configuration has been set forward in FedRAMP. So hats off to the FedRAMP group. Being a former JAB member, I'm super proud that they're really continuing to enable that capability so that it gives you all a lot of choices. But with choices comes a lot of complication. And so, Bill, how does Splunk sort of help solve some of those problems and other tools like Splunk, because this is complicated, right? And how do you make this easy on the agencies so that they can enable these capabilities as they're trying to deal with soft skills and cheese moving and all these other things that they have to manage, budgets, et cetera?
It really starts with a point John just brought up. Security is a day one activity. In the past, we always added it after the fact. We were always trying to collect that body of evidence for the ATO after we finished our testing. It was the last thing we did before we went to production. Because the cloud fundamentally changes the way we look at IT and we look at applications, that's an opportunity to start at the beginning and ask those questions. What are we securing? What are the criteria we have to meet? And then more importantly, where do we apply those controls and then collect that body of evidence? When I owned applications, I was responsible for securing the full stack top to bottom. That was a broad challenge. As we move to the cloud, as we move to FedRAMP, we move to where we now take infrastructure as just being there. We're consuming it. And we're consuming the security of it as well. It actually, in many ways, makes my job as an application owner or a service owner easier because now I can focus on those items that I understand well and those other things in the infrastructure that I may not have understood as well as I hoped. I've abstracted away and I'm able to leverage the investments that others have made in this. So it's really a matter of helping people focus on their areas, their swim lanes, collecting up that body of knowledge, providing that visibility, and then getting to that package so we can achieve ATO in maybe not a day, but how about a week?
I think we're all looking forward to ATO in a day, but I think if we can get something just in between ATO in a day and what it is today, I think that's a win. Look, there's a lot of direction and a lot of enablement and a lot of we'll say goals that are being set upon the agencies to move into the cloud, right? Cloud first started with actually the consolidation of the data centers 10 years ago, the good old 25-point plan, all the way up to you will do cloud first and you'll do it quickly or use shared service, et cetera. Where does cloud fit into your overall IT modernization strategy? Is it sort of number one, number two, number three? Is it, it's, look, we're moving to the cloud as fast as we can. That is our IT strategy. And where does that fit into the overall ecosystem? Well, let's start with VA. So
the VA IT modernization program, which it's a public document that you can get off of OMB, it's got three major drivers in it in terms of moving IT in a modern way. One of those is cloud. So cloud is significant in terms of trying to modernize an organization that is big as and complicated as the VA is. When you talk about healthcare and benefits and the memorials and those kinds of things, cemeteries and that kind of stuff, it's huge. And cloud, I think the VA recognizes that the cloud is important enough to be, one of the major factors in the IT modernization program.
I love the idea of the phrase, modernize in a modern way, right? I think that's very important. If you could just share with the audience, what are the other two pillars? You have cloud is one of your three, right? Are there a couple other ones there that you guys have?
There are, but I can't remember what they are.
Sure, no problem. Ken, how about cloud? Is it all about cloud, and once we get everything to the cloud, we're done with our strategy, or is it more to it than that?
There's more to it than that. So we're in the process of finalizing the update to our overall department IT strategy modernization plan. We've got data as a strategic asset is one of the key tenets to that. We've got user experience and usability. How do we really focus on that, the digesting of technology and information for the mission? IT modernization is another one of our key goal areas. And our cloud piece is integrated into how we're going to be modernizing. So in our 16 to 19 strategic plan, cloud was up as one of the top three goals. Now it's embedded into a tool set for how we're going to modernize in a modernized way. And then we have strategic workforce planning, looking at what does the IT worker of the future look like. This is a significant question for us. We've got the Foreign Service and the Civil Service. We have practitioners at various levels doing IT in every mission, in every embassy and consulate around the globe. And as we move to a consumption model, the number one question when we have our tradecraft courses from mid to at all levels, what is my job going to look like in 5 years? So we're really looking, and I think part of that workforce planning issue is what does an IT organization look like? I think that's some of the work that the VA has done to address that organization, and how do you bring this kind of modernization to the organization? And that's just another huge challenge for us as we go forward. Changing an organizational structure in the federal government is no easy task. It's probably harder than architecting the cloud ecosystem because of all the HR issues associated with that. But
yeah,
so it's a key piece, and that hybrid model. What should go? What shouldn't? What are the high value assets? Where do we put those? And how do we bring all that together? I think there's a real opportunity for us with legacy system, and some of our legacy systems, which are not necessarily at the forefront of the migration effort, have not attended to their data for 20 years or maybe even longer. So as we move to a new infrastructure environment, what does it mean to have a data architecture, data standards, data security? And I'm doing Splunk talk now, so but how do we do that so that we don't perpetuate a 20th century problem with data?
Yeah, and you kind of modernize in a modern way, and one of the things you just sussed out here is also sort of modernizing your IT worker in a modern way, right? So just a whole different aspect to this modernization.
I was going to add something. Just kind of add to that. One of the things that we're doing right now, in a major way, is looking at how to retool the skill set of our workforce. Yeah. There's a lot of concern amongst the workforce. If we go to the cloud, what's going to happen to my job and that kind of thing. And so we're looking at ways to, again, retool that skill set so that they can move from the application they're working on now to a cloud type environment or a spin-off of that type of thing to keep that workforce gainfully employed.
Sure, and then, Splunk, again, from your perspective here, when you're looking at this, well, what are you seeing across the landscape? Is it cloud first, second, and third, and we're all in? Or is it, yeah, that's a piece of it, and it's kind of the fabric, but it's bigger than that?
It's more of the latter. It's a piece. It's one of the tools in our toolbox. We see agencies going through this, but let me take the Wayback Machine and turn it forward. Let me give you a view from tomorrow for just a second. Many of your agencies out there, if I told you about an organization, budget 1 billion, 3,500 employees, and 99% of their IT is in the cloud. Would that be interesting to you? That's Splunk today. We have very little physical IT. I work with our CIO quite a bit. A lot of our stuff is as a service. A lot of our stuff is in the cloud. And as we look forward, those challenges that you gentlemen articulated are very real. And it is, as you move from on-prem to the cloud, it's a non-trivial process. But I share the Splunk story as an example of a significant organization that has moved forward. And we have had lessons learned. And please talk to us about this, because it's not just what we're seeing in our customers, but there's a lot of been there, done that.
Sure.
As we transitioned and moved forward.
Yeah, and I would
as well.
imagine, the day will come when agencies, moving into the cloud and running in the cloud will just become table stakes, and it's all about moving up the value chain. We have about 5 minutes left, and we want to open up some time here for some questions from the audience. So we're going to ask you all to just fire away here, and just wait for the mics. We got 2 up here that have questions. Yep, please.
Yes.
And if you could just announce who you are, and yeah.
Good morning. My name's Henry Hartley. I'm a software cloud architect. I've worked at the VA in particular, and I guess this is kind of the forum panel. I think with the emergence of cloud in particular, there are a number of security concerns. And I'm wondering what, as a group, is being done to develop common security frameworks, like at a CAC level for hybrid, both Amazon and Azure. Netflix has been very successful in building the Netflix OSS stack, and I'm wondering what between agencies is being done to build a common security framework.
So let me start by telling you what we're doing. Our cloud organization is relatively new, but one of the first things that they began was to build what we call general support services or common core services, and part of that is exactly what you're talking about. We want to be able to use the security aspects of both AWS and Azure, but there are some common themes in there that we need to connect, and so we're in the process of doing that, not done yet, but we recognize the need for it.
Ken, how about over at State?
I mentioned earlier one of the key pieces to our cloud architecture is the IDMS and how we're going to be leveraging that. But we published a cloud and a cybersecurity architecture back in 2010. We're in the process of updating that cybersecurity architecture to lay out these common controls that we're going to be using in the ecosystem, the centralized shared service. So that's kind of the next phase of our journey. I think one of the things that is helping our CISO is stopping the building of silo cloud environments that all have to be ATO'd. So if I can go from many to few and secure those well and provide inherited controls at the SaaS layer, I'm addressing a lot of my security concerns, going forward. So that's kind of at a high level what we're doing with the security piece.
So I'll spin it around a little bit, Bill. Rather than ask you about how you see it being done with the agencies, how's Splunk doing this?
Internally?
Yeah, let's hear that, as a best practice.
Great question there. It's really going back and beginning
Since
to rethink.
you've gone big into the cloud.
We've absolutely gone big into the cloud, and these challenges of understanding what you can understand, gaining visibility into it. And sometimes you're asking different questions that what worked on-prem may not work in the cloud, or more importantly, as we go to a multi-cloud environment and begin to deal with different vendors, different providers out there, Azure, Amazon. There's challenges in there as well, and really you have to step back and ask those basic questions. What are we trying to secure? What is the level of risk we're willing to accept for the cost to mitigate it on air? So it's a refactoring of the approach.
Careful questions up front. We have another question here. Yeah. Last question here.
My name is Ross Anderson. I work for the Air Force at acquisition. And my question has to do with providers service. Are there security controls adequate to protect the data? And for example, and do we need a technology that we need to add additional security for data so we don't lose it for exfiltration? And the second part of the question is concern is supply chain risk management. The hardware that's in the cloud, is it we have built-in vulnerabilities? So are we controlling the supply chain on the cloud? And if there's exfiltration from the cloud because of supply chain or credential compromise, are we requiring the service provider to let us know what's been compromised in a timely manner?
Well, that's a packed up question. I'm going to throw that one at Ken and just get your perspective. I know it's a lot to try to answer, but just give us your perspective on it. I'm sure you're thinking about these
Yeah,
things
we're absolutely-
as you're making these choices on the different cloud service providers.
We attend to the supply chain across the Department of State and what we're doing on-prem, and part of the apprehension of our diplomatic security and our information assurance, their apprehension of moving as fast as all of our customers want to move is that very issue. And as we're in the middle of our acquisitions, our cloud acquisitions process, and we're looking across the federal government, FedRAMP. What are those controls that are embedded in what's being pushed out at the FedRAMP level, and then what are the additional controls that we as an agency need to put on top of that? And so FedRAMP takes you to the 80% or 90% mark, and then there's controls that need to be done at above that line based on our open activity that we do at diplomatic public diplomacy, our SBU activity that we do. So our conversation outside of the secret level, we're looking at SBU data at low, medium, and high, and what are the controls at all of those SBU levels, and making sure we have the right platforms to accommodate that. So part of our cloud strategy is kind of data-driven hosting. What kind of data is it, and where should it sit? And in our infrastructure layer, what controls do we have to make sure the data is protected at the right level? But there's a lot more to go on to that.
Sure, and at the end of the day, it is about where is your data, what is your data, and how are you accounting for it, controlling it, and securing it. That's all the time we have today, and I want to thank our guests for a very interesting conversation, and thank all of you. So